Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another interview here today on the channel. Today, we're going to be talking to a duo that was once a trio that was once a duo. This band's unidentified history started on June 18th, 2023, when What's That Song user NY80's Tapes uploaded a 30-second snippet of a very fast-paced, almost video game-like sounding synth track. The OP got his recording from the radio station WFMU in 1982, and while it was mysterious, it went under the placeholder name CIA Hates Communists. On July 6, 2023, the OP would upload another unknown synth track that he got around the same time, only this one had a more hectic sound to it. While both of these snippets were unknown, they were believed to be from the same song. Now, the way it was solved comes in a few steps. First, the OP found a SoundCloud account belonging to a Steve Mecca, where he teased of an upcoming album for a band called Chemistry Set. The song that plays sounds identical to the second snippet. In fact, upon hearing it, it's safe to say it's the same song. With this information, What's That Song user Bone Machine does some digging on this Chemistry Set, and is able to find and contact a Terry Kennedy. Upon her reply, she confirmed that CIA Hates Communists was by Chemistry Set, but it was actually called Iron Curtain. The second snippet was found to be another one of their songs called Chemistry. In fact, once the Iron Curtain mystery fell, it was discovered that NY80's Tapes had actually recorded a few of their other songs off of radio that went mysterious for a little while as well. And today, we have the original duo, Steve Mecca and Terry Kennedy, here to discuss everything regarding their little musical project. So please, sit back, relax, get your RVs revving, because we're dipping into some chemistry. Enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, I am sitting here today with the Chemistry Set, starring Terry Kennedy and Steve Mecca. Both of you guys, thank you so much for your time. How are you today?
Great.
Hey, how are you, Nikki?
Good. Thank you for asking, and thank you again for taking the time to do this interview. As you can see, Terry has the Chemistry Set background, so she's 100% prepared for this. Steve?
No.
He's got a cool cat shirt, so he's also prepared for this, so we're ready to get rolling.
Hey, just one little correction here. It's Chemistry Set, not the Chemistry Set. Even though Amazon seems to want to keep the, no matter how many times we tell them it's Chemistry Set.
It's like Blue Oyster Cult. It's not the Blue Oyster Cult. I was reading through your pamphlet here, which again is a good resource for the whole origin of your guys' story. You guys talked about meeting when you guys were auditioning for a band called, I'm gonna hope I say this right, Cathexis? No, not even close. Cathexis. Thank you.
Of course, nobody else knew how to pronounce it either. But yeah, it was a prog rock band, art rock, and I was still in college, and some of the other people had also either met through that process in college. But, we were very serious, and we have very serious music to write, very long songs. Both Steve and I come from a writer background. I mean, I can just say for myself, I started writing stories and songs from when I was almost single digits into like middle school. So I'm sure Steve started, pretty early too.
Yeah, I was. I was in the 70s, actually, up until the time of that band. I was a writer for a rock paper called The Aquarian, which maybe some people have heard of, in New Jersey. It was New Jersey, New York metropolitan area, and I did reviews and live concert performance reviews and interviews and stuff. Yeah, I did have a journalistic background to some extent, and I had been writing songs since like I was 15 years old. Back then, none of them were any good, but
I mean, you gotta start somewhere.
Well, that's how we honed our craft and learned that nobody wanted to listen to 10, 12-minute songs anymore by 1978, 79. So it was kind of a transition time, for music, with punk and disco and all kinds of various styles of music really becoming very popular.
We became fascinated with electronic keyboards.
Yes.
Terry bought a Polymoog. This was back in Cathexis. And I bought an ARP 2600 because I really wanted to experiment with electronic sounds.
Right.
And it seemed like a good idea to put a band together that was based on that rather than guitars. Well, we had a lot of problems with people who played guitar too.
Yes.
They seemed
So
to have
we made a vow, right? Keyboards and a drum machine. That way we don't have to worry about personnel quitting or deciding they want to be, a manager at a local pharmacy or something.
So I'm assuming EVH wasn't sent an invitation to start chemistry set?
No.
No, okay. So then, with what you guys were doing around this time, the late 70s, early 80s, alongside what was happening on the music scene at that time, how did these days influence your musical style going forward?
Well, what we were hearing at the time, there was a lot of British synth pop coming out. I mean, everything from like Gary Newman and Yaz and Human League, and that stuff was charting really well in the UK, and eventually it would filter into US charts. We really kind of liked that concept. It was like, this is interesting. This is unique. Nobody around here is doing this. And sure enough, in our area, I can't count more than 2 or 3 bands that were doing anything close to an all synth band. I mean, there was like XEX and Crash Course in Science, but this was really pretty much electro novelty music rather than anything, pop oriented. And we realized that we kind of had to be pop oriented if we wanted people to take notice and we wanted to sell any product at all.
Plus, again, we came from that prog rock background, and for me, being a keyboard player, of course, listening to Keith Emerson and Rick Wakeman and Moody Blues with the Mellotron, that really fascinated me, just the sounds and the concepts of it. And I started taking electronic music in college in 1976. So that was pretty early. And I got that Polymoog, because Chick Corea had one. I had to have a Polymoog, took all my college savings and put it into that like $3,500 Polymoog, which back then probably would, equate to what, $12,000 today or something.
At least,
It was crazy. We needed to have that sound in prog rock just to, to have that big sound. So we decided to pare it down. And when it was just the two of us and we had a handshake deal, it's like, we're not going to deal with any more people. I know Steve used the word clown, but clowns who come and go and who stay for like a month or two and waste our time. And now we're not doing those songs. So let's pare it down. Steve got a drum machine and that could keep the beat. And, he started using his ARP 2600 for the sound effects as well as sequencing. And, we just kept building from there. I got a 4-track. That's, TIAC 4-track. That's where
Porta Studio. Yeah.
Yeah. The Porta Studio is where Iron Curtain was taped, along with a lot of the earlier songs, some of which are still, I don't know if they're on Lost Wave, but they're floating around. And it was a guy, not a clown, but somebody else named, his handle is New York 80s, who apparently taped off of the radio. WFMU was a radio station that Steve and I used to go on once in a while.
We got a nice little bit of support from FMU.
Yeah, and those were the radio days. The late 70s, early 80s, like around the turn of that decade, was when we would go on radio stations, and primarily FMU. We went on a couple of others too. We went on one in New York. We basically just were appreciated as being like this underground band that a lot of people thought we were British, because of course that's a lot of our influence. And instead, when they found out we were from New Jersey, and you're like, what?
They're like, why are you spelling vapor with a U?
Right. I know that was a little pretentious, but I wanted to get the point across.
I mean, to be fair, like, that was my first thought too. Like, when I'm looking at the album that you sent me, I saw that you spelled vapor that one. I'm like, wait, aren't they from the States? Like, isn't this a UK kind of thing?
We're not putting on any pretentious British accents, so get away with a U.
Yeah, you were right. NY80s tapes, that's his What's That Song? That's the name of the website that he uploaded the snippets from. He had Iron Curtain, Chemistry, King's Gambit, and I'm a Vapor. Those were the 4 that he uploaded. So at one point, those other 3 tracks were also technically Lost Wave too.
When we went on and we had our little, and there was some other songs too that we haven't released yet, which we may. we'll get into that, that were also circulating around, Paradise Eyes, Carpe Diem, some others that were little snippets as well that we must have gone, and we didn't even remember some of these things. We must have gone on in 81 when we were still a duo. They were played on FMU, and of course Radio Days, they would have them on rotation, and you'd just be driving along and you'd hear your song in the car and be great. Those days are gone, obviously, but we're very thankful that you found us, and that others have found us through YouTube too, and have been asking for more. And
we never played out live though until we were a trio, until Mr. Reeves showed up one day with his Simmons drum pads and Art Omni and other stuff, and said, "I'm here to play. Let's go, guys." So
by late 81, we're so busy, like, not octopuses, but somehow we managed to control all the machines. But we were looking for a third person so that we could have even more keyboards and possibly syndromes, just some maybe support for going live, because that was something that was very much important at the time. Was clubs were a thing too, and coming out of the 70s, people would go to clubs. That's where people would hear the music. There was pre-internet, was clubbing and radio.
So for a good long time, our focus was on live performance and songs that we could consider doing live that didn't require a lot of extra overdubbing and things like that. So we were kind of confined and limited to a certain set of things that we could do. Later on, when we went into the studio, we got a deal through WDHA had this compilation contest thing, submit your tune or whatever. And so we ended up being on their compilation album, and they paid for the studio time. Our first trip into the studio as a band, and that's where we found out that Mike liked playing out a lot better than he liked being in the studio. But Terry and I love the studio. It's like the studio is our second home. We need to get more of this. We need to do more of this. More studio, more songs, more overdubs, more everything.
There's the Beatles influence.
There you go. And that was actually kind of going to lead into my next question, because Mike joins the band late 81. How did everyone's chemistry mix in regards to songwriting once he joined?
It was still pretty good. He had some interesting ideas that some of them we really liked, some of them we didn't like as much, but we tried them out. We were trying to be egalitarian about it, and for the most part we were, but the core was always like Lennon and McCartney. The core was always Kennedy Mecca. So that was where most of the songwriting was going to emanate from.
Kennedy Mecca sounds like an airport. I don't know. It sounds cool.
But we actually played out a lot, and a lot of these places were like either showcases or just Tuesday open mic night almost. So we actually played a song by Mike called "Blown on the Coast," a reggae song, and we would jam sometimes. In my basement, or my mother's basement. That's where we had our rehearsals, and we would just jam sometimes. And that's how the song Chemistry came about, actually. We were, Mike said, "Hey, I got a riff here." And Mike was always very enthusiastic. And we all had a volume of work, whether it was like snippets of lyrics or snippets of music that we wanted to try out. And then, Steve would set the sequencer up, and he'd maybe have a drum machine track going. And next thing we know, we'd be, grooving along with some chords. And, Mike and I would play some different chords and some different keyboard lines, and he started playing this thing that sounded like, I said, "Wait a minute, that's Beethoven's Fifth Symphony." So we're like, "Yeah, let's jam on that." So we started jamming on that. Steve started adding more sound effects and more of the bass sequencing, because Steve was pretty much the rhythm section. Mike and I were just trading off lines and whatnot, and next thing you know, it was Chemistry. And we really had fun in the studio with that one too, because I remember Mike going into the grand piano that was in the studio. By the way, if anybody paid for anything, Steve, it was maybe only for part of the King's Gambit, because we shelled out the money ourselves to do 4 songs.
Oh, really? I forgot about
that. Yeah, no, we shelled out the money. You forgot. You and I were the only ones ever paid for anything. But
well, that's true. We paid for an awful lot back then. It's like we paid for the video, we paid for a lot of the studio time and the other studios, and up to a point.
But so we did the 4 songs in the studio for Chemistry. Not only were we all singing Chemistry and playing all kinds of keyboards, whatever we could find in there in the studio, as well as our own keyboards. But there was a grand piano. So we had this great idea to it was
the
very
backwards
Beatlesque.
piano.
Let's be honest, it was going in there with a pick inside the strings and playing the entire set of strings and then rewinding it and starting it and ending the song with that, going backwards and forwards. And when I was in the studio in Osiris Studio, where we had the mastering done for the CD, Michael Graves, the Grammy winner, was like, "How'd you get some of these sounds?" He was like very fascinated by these 80s sounds, and he's like, "Well, how'd you get that one?" And I told him that about the piano. He goes, "Aha!" It was like, that's what that is.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because nowadays you can get any sound you want with whatever equipment is out there. I mean, it's a virtual world of virtually unlimited sounds. I mean,
Right.
if we were to do new music, it would sound totally, completely different in terms of the sound palette. I think the concepts and the style would be very, very similar. But
I think it kind of fits your mystique that, people are asking, how did you guys get these sounds? Because it sounds like it was an experiment then from a lab. So I think it kind of fits the whole scientific theme. Apparently back in the late 80s, you guys were making music for movement therapy to help disabled youth, which again, I want to admire that, because I think that's a super cool thing to do. But I'm just curious, what kind of music were you making for that program? Was it something that was similar to the Sound of Chemistry set?
Not at all real. Well, I would say that it was electronic. Steve had a friend who was a movement artist, Lavinia Plunka, and she had a studio and worked off Broadway. And we started with the option, well, Steve presented that she was looking for music and also arrangements of Cole Porter of Duke Ellington for this performance art that she was doing. She started in galleries and then also off Broadway. And so we had the opportunity to rearrange Cole Porter, Begin the Begin, and also some other, very early 30s and 40s type music. And also just compose in our own style too. She asked for example, a polka. So it was called Zart Cabaret. I think the advertisement for it was best performance west of Warsaw, for polka. It was really quite an opportunity to do something very different. But that's one of the things about Chemistry Set. We're always up for doing something different. So we have kind of a span of different styles that we've written. And then she went and was teaching movement therapy at a college for youth who were in wheelchairs. And I mean, it was literally tear jerking for me to work on this and try to come up with some music that would help them feel something. We try to be really positive, and of course we had the beat, and it was just great to see them doing wheelies in their wheelchairs. It was just, I literally cried. It was just amazing that they were wheeled in, and then by the end of the time that they were listening to 20 minutes of our music, they were smiling and doing wheelies, and it was just incredible.
That's so cool. I love to hear that, because that's just something that you don't really hear a lot of musicians do, or maybe they do, but they just never really talk about it. They'll donate, they'll make donations, they'll start charities, but like doing something that's really more proactive and actually like involved like that, I think that's just a super cool concept.
Yeah, well, we tried a lot of things. We had some opportunities to experiment with. For me personally, that led for me to actually adopt a special needs child. So that's like the last 20 years of my life. He's 21 now, and he wants to be a skateboarder. But
that's awesome. Good for him.
The point is, he's alive. He wouldn't have been alive otherwise without that constant, support. With music, it's not just for fun. It's to do something meaningful, to try to affect people on a very intrinsic emotional level. And if you can touch people that way, it's so heartwarming. It's like there's no better feeling in the world, really.
Do you have any of the music that you made for that program? Do you have any of that left still, or is that considered lost wave?
It's very lost wave, because I don't think I even have that on a 4-track, although I'll have to go digging into the archives of your toys. That was one of the things it was called. I don't know if Steve, if you remember anything else about that.
That period of time is kind of a blank in my mind. The one other side project, or not Chemistry Set project, that we were involved in was a new age world music thing called Malaysian Pale that we did put out an album that was internationally distributed. That's probably where we're most known from outside of Chemistry Set, because that did get around. It did get a lot of airplay, and it did get a lot of distribution. An album called Nature's Fantasies. We don't know what happened to the guy who was with us in that. He went on to do more or less or something else. It was kind of neat to do at the time.
To explain that segue, though, it's a matter of, again, well, we were building up our repertoire, and we got to the point of having the opportunity to have King's Gambit onto a compilation CD. It wasn't CD, it was a vinyl album. It was right before CD.
There was no CD
84.
for that.
Yeah, it was 84. When that came out, by the time that came out in 85, personnel in our band had changed. So Mike had already left. He didn't want to do more videos. He wasn't even that thrilled about doing the video to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to just jam and play a lot. So, he went out. We're still in touch with him. We might do something together in the future. He's all about jamming, and he still lives in New Jersey, and he's a great guy. There were a couple of other people who passed through the band, and they just didn't click in the same way. So we had an opportunity in 85. Actually, Steve and I went to Mexico, and when we came back, we wrote the whole Maroon Afternoon thing. Yeah, an instrumental cassette that we passed around on this new radio program at the time called Synthetic Pleasure, because New Age and New Wave was kind of becoming this instrumental, more mellow, less hyperactive synth pop stuff. We kind of got into that with Maroon Afternoon.
It was sort of our foray into ambient music.
Yeah,
in a sense.
Yeah, instrumental, ambient, experimental, impressionist, whatever you want to call it. But that led to a connection to work on Nature's Fantasies, which I still see it for sale here and there and whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
$1.29 in the bargain bin.
No, it's more than that, actually. I think the CD is actually worth more than the vinyl. I don't know why. You never know.
I saw it on Walmart's website last week for $11.27. I know.
Walmart has everything. They have every piece of lost music that was ever released. It seems like you can buy it on Walmart for anywhere between $1.29 and $125 or something.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You can find CDs at even the Dollar Tree, Savers. I found a CD once. I don't know where it is, but it was a CD that was so obscure it wasn't anywhere online besides like one page. And I was like, yes, I finally got lost media. But then I found that one page. I was like, damn. Because had it not been anywhere online, I would have had an actual piece of found lost media. But you can find stuff like that in Savers, Walmart, the Dollar Tree, just waiting to be discovered. So it's kind of crazy how like the next Lost Wave is still somewhere waiting to be.
Yeah, well, actually, almost everything on Experiments from the Lab is in a way kind of waiting to be discovered, because as wide as our distribution is through Spotify, Amazon, Deezer, you name it, every platform, almost every platform covered. There's actually platforms that will not take what's considered new wave music. I don't know why. They just don't. Maybe they're just, all hip hop and rap or something. But
it's all in the labeling, I guess. There's so many different labels now. Back then, when we started, there were like 5 different labels.
Yeah, if you didn't have a label or some money behind you or you weren't going anywhere back in the 80s. You had to have something. Even the bands, even those little New York City bands that started out small and released their own stuff, had their own records pressed. A lot of them were really, really good, but they didn't get anywhere because they didn't get any label support. You had to have it then. You don't have to have it now, but you need an army of followers. That's the problem. Yeah. You need to have a massive following in order to get any traction. So that's what we're working on, a massive following.
I mean, in the 70s, back in the day, like you said, if you didn't have a label or a massive following, you weren't getting anywhere. But by the 80s, there was an alternative, MTV, which you guys actually have some history with. You want to go into that?
Well, the thing about MTV is that it was still major label haven. If your video was good enough, you could get it slipped, and our video was good enough because it was shot by the cinematographer of the New York Giants, Tony Seglio, it was a quality product on film. It was
on film.
storyboarded and the whole nine yards. If you had a quality video that was catchy enough, fit within their format, you could get some play out of it and maybe even some major label attention. Perhaps if our video had been played a few more times, we might have had some major label attention. Unfortunately, we went down the wrong road on agents and managers, which kind of set us back a bit. But that's another story for another time.
We didn't have any connections, let's be honest. We were working out of a basement in New Jersey, and we had zero connections whatsoever. So it's amazing that we were found by WhatsApp and anyone out there, which, being a former interviewer, I'm going to flip the script here. Nikki, I noticed from some of our followers, and we're up to like a whopping 65 subscribers now on Chemistry Set. There are a lot of people in your age bracket. And what is it about Chemistry Set that appeals to you and the kids? From us old person perspective, it's like, what is it about our music that potentially is interesting to your generation?
I think for one, it's the kind of people in my generation that are actually coming across your music. A lot of these people, at least that are my fans that come to my channel, a lot of them are musically inclined, where they're performing at jazz shows, they're learning an instrument, they maybe are working on something that is in the music realm. Because a lot of people my age, I'll be honest, they're not really interested in music from the 80s and the 70s. They're more interested in modern stuff. But a lot of people my age and younger who are in this Lost Wave community, a lot of them are musically inclined, or maybe they're just really interested in music like myself, where I collect CDs, I collect vinyl. And it's a fascination to us because Steve mentioned it earlier. It's fascinating when a song, we have the full audio or partial audio of it, but we can't put a name to the artist or the song. So that naturally right there is going to make us more interested because it's a mystery. With that said, there are a lot of people who, even when the band gets solved, they do stick around and listen to what they have coming next, even if it's not everyone that was just waiting for the mystery to be solved. But yeah, I would definitely say it's that. And a funny thing too, if this makes you feel even more amazed about this, a lot of these people aren't even from America. They're from Canada, they're from South America. A lot of them are from Germany, Poland, Ireland, the UK. So your song, regardless of how many subscribers you guys got on your channel now, is being heard around the world. And I can confirm that for you.
I've been following the stats, and I was noticing it's a hit in Finland.
There you go.
Brazil is like going up the charts here with.
Oh, there's a big. If you take a look at Facebook groups for synth pop between Brazil and Venezuela, there's like a dozen of them. They love that kind of music there. I mean, I'm sure they like a lot of other music like rap, hip hop, salsa, any permutation of any genre that has been hammered out.
I mentioned this in my last interview too, but I'll mention it again. There was a song from Brazil that was a dance song, like a freestyle dance song. It's actually the placeholder name was Fond My Mind. You may have heard that name before because that's the name of the server, maybe. That's the name of the Discord server. That was the placeholder name for the Brazilian song, but it was actually found to be called Feels Like a Wish by Station K. So now let's talk about why you guys are here in this interview, in the first place. Iron Curtain, for a little backstory. June 18th, 2023, What's That Song user NY80s Tapes uploaded a snippet of a song that at the time was dubbed CIA Hates Communists, as that's what was heard in the lyrics. Lo and behold, it was discovered and solved on August 26, 2023. That's when it was officially confirmed that the song is actually called Iron Curtain by Chemistry Set, and I just want to make sure I got my facts right. You guys were actually the ones to confirm that it was your song once you uploaded the full song, correct?
Right, yeah. I was dabbling into learning how to make videos at the time because Steve said, got to have a presence on all the social media. He was going to handle the distribution.
Everything is video.
Look into YouTube. I was learning Premiere Pro. And in doing that and exploring how to set up a YouTube channel, I noticed that there was a snippet of Iron Curtain. I was like, wait a minute. It sounded not quite right, but it was definitely Iron Curtain. And I couldn't believe it because I only started looking into it around August 25th about YouTube. And I had noticed that this had been going on for a couple of months and we had done absolutely nothing.
No, nobody knew
advertise anything yet. Nobody
knew our album was coming out or anything. It
was over in Czechoslovakia at the time, still getting pressed. And we had not told anyone. I mean, this was like, we were like a lost wave. And then all of a sudden I see this and was so freaky. I was like, what the heck is this? And I started.
Yeah, she emailed me about it. She said, do you know anything about this? I said, no, I have no idea. How'd this come about? It was just one of those really out of the blue kind of things that was so coincidental we couldn't believe it.
It's just the timing couldn't have been better, just because
Right.
you guys were already in the process of, getting your stuff out there.
If we knew what we were doing, we probably would have kept underground for a few more months to get a few more viewers.
Right.
You didn't ask this, but we never would have been in the process if it wasn't for a fellow named Bill Bailey, who runs a boutique label called Equation Records. And he's put out a whole bunch of stuff, really interesting things, from everything from punk rock to new wave. He was behind getting a band called Taming the Outback released, which a lot of people know about. And they're kind of a cult band that sort of sounds like a cross between Echo and the Bunnymen and Simple Mind. But anyway, I had done a review for him on Chain DLK, and I sent him some stuff that was really third generation demo from a tape. He's like, this is fantastic. We got to get this out there. We got to get it released. I'll pay for it. Well, the magic words were, I'll pay for it. So that's how we ended up doing this. That's when I contacted Terry. I said, you wouldn't happen to have those old master tapes that we did? And Terry said, let me look around. And lo and behold, she did have them.
I keep everything, Steve. So, careful what you say.
Kind of a hoarder scenario there?
No, it's a word. Yeah, it's just in a closet. It was just in a closet. I carried these tapes with me from like 11 different moves across the country. I don't know what I was going to do with these 24-track tapes. You can't even, there's no machines that play them anymore. When I went to the Grammy winner up in Osiris, he's like, no, we can't play this. We don't know where we can get a hold of a machine that'll play this.
But Terry's backstory on the lyrical content of Iron Curtain is kind of interesting.
I was just going to ask, what is the backstory and what's the inspiration for the song Iron Curtain?
Again, we were very eclectic. We covered a lot of different topics, and we didn't want to just write another silly love song, to quote Paul McCartney. I had done a lot of traveling with my mom, who was a teacher every summer. We would go to Europe when I was in junior high school. One of the years, when I was 14, she decided, I don't know why, because there was no reason for it. We went to Berlin, and she thought it would be cool to go through Checkpoint Charlie and see how, during the Cold War in 1973, the other side, operated. I guess just being a curious teacher, I guess that's where the curiosity came from. Going from West Berlin to East Berlin, it was like on a 14-year-old's mind, it was my mind was blown, it was like going from, your typical German hustle bustle on the streets, people drinking beer, at their pubs, etc. And then all of a sudden, stark, black and white, men with machine guns in front of buildings that you can't take pictures of. And you had to go through this little Checkpoint Charlie thing, which they've since closed down, obviously. This little narrow area where all these guards in different uniforms from the US and from Russia and from, I guess East German part of it, I don't know. But the thing was, once we got in there and we were walking down the streets, which was a fairly large boulevard, there was only like this group of like 8 or 10 of us that were allowed in at once. You had to leave your passport and everything. And it was really very nerve-wracking. And you could see bullet holes in the sides of the buildings and signs that were just, well, in German and also in Russian, were just like verboten or forbidden, or, everything was just very, don't look, don't talk, just walk. And now you're going to go down this long street, and at the end, you can, turn around, walk back, but you are not allowed to engage in conversation. You're not really allowed to look at anybody. It's like, at Buckingham Palace, you can't look at the guards and trying to make them laugh. But I mean, forget it. It was verboten. So once we got in there, though, we got on a train and we went further on into East Germany, and we could see all the bomb buildings from World War II. Now, mind you, this is 1973, so we're talking 30 years later, and there's still just gray haze everywhere, rubble everywhere, and nothing has been rebuilt. There's like these smokestacks dilapidated buildings. I mean, it was just really, I was obviously moved by the situation, and it stayed with me for a long time. I always liked to travel, but then when we were writing songs and looking for material, I just remember on a day off from work, and we both always worked like full time. I was in the basement coming up with some noodling, and I came up with Iron Curtain, and I put some lyrics down. And you know how some of these songs that are the more memorable ones sometimes come very quickly. And then, played it for Steve. He put in that incessant beat with the synthesized sequence.
Well, that was fun. That was a fun riff that I
I love that.
It was a fun riff that I was experimenting with and that came about on the ARP 2600, I believe, because I remember having to go up high for the it was basically a monophonic instrument that could do duophonic, play two notes at a time if you really pushed it. What was to the lyrical content Terry came up with, except for the KGB checks the list, CIA hates communists. That was Mike and my contribution to the thing.
Yeah.
We just thought that would make an interesting, not exactly a chorus, but an interesting tag to put in there. So that was.
Yeah, we were on the 4-track, and I'd already taped some stuff. Then Steve taped his thing, and then Mike would come over all the way from Red Bank for like an hour and a half trip that's how dedicated he was. And I said, okay, you guys, you got to be like, the KGB or the CIA or something. You got to make this sound even more
forceful.
ominous.
Right.
Yeah, it was more ominous.
We had the two of them in front of one mic going KGB. Yeah. No other effects other than,
just like a chant, just KG.
Just inciting them to be as ominous as possible.
It's also funny how, you go through this whole, adventure and journey from like West Germany to East Germany, and you write all these lyrics for this song. And then the part that him and Mike come up with, that's the part that becomes the lost. That's how you guys
That's the complaint. The new version doesn't have it. By the way, when I was doing the new version between 2009 and 2014, when I was first experimenting with Pro Tools, Putin just happened to invade again, do something over in Crimea. So in 2014, I just got really into it again and started rewriting some of the lyrics. And I actually had put the KGB CIA little snippet in there. But then I thought, I'm going more serious now. That was almost kind of kitschy back then in 82. It was almost like, the Man from U.N.C.L.E. If
it sound right.
Harkening back to like 60s and 70s impressions of what the Cold War was like, because people didn't go over to Russia back then.
Yeah.
But by 2014, it was definitely more serious because and insidious. And obviously now, speaking about timing, by the time Iron Curtain resurfaced with New York Tapes, it was already right after Putin again goes and invades. So
Terry's updated version sounds a lot more Russian than the original. I mean, the original was strictly electro synth. Hey, let's make an interesting song about the U.S. Soviet conflict. It worked on its own little level, but in a certain sense, it's really kind of dated, and it sort of needed to be updated in a sense to give it a little bit more modern credibility, I suppose.
Well, I always wanted to do that on the 24-track when we had the 4 songs that we were going to do on the 24-track. I always wanted to do that one. Because it went over very well live, if you recall.
Oh yeah,
we would play live. That was one of the ones. I mean, I put the armband on. I made this. I used to make some costumes too, all black. Jumpsuit, whatever it was, leotard with the red armband, and just very ominous type of performance with we used to use dry ice and some lighting to make things look more interesting.
We had an interesting, if modest in terms of expense, I suppose, stage demeanor. So
I read you guys used to wear lab coats, like you said. You do
we started out with that. That was a big, pretty obvious and evident. Okay, well, we know these guys are chemistry set. They're wearing lab coats, so.
If I could interject, we would start a lot of times. We'd mix up the set list, but a lot of times we'd start with, say, Vapor, which had a lot of sound effects, and we'd have the Dry Ice, I remember having to stop by and get the dry ice before a gig, and
Yeah.
it would come up off a back table with some glassware, which we had found, somewhere. And,
Stolen from,
somehow
By the
we would
dumpster,
all
yeah.
be in the
college
lab
lab
coats,
is
all
more
three of
like
us.
it.
We'd all be in the lab coats, but then when it was my turn to come, I'd start off behind the keyboard, but then when I'd go up front, the lab coat would come off and it would be like a mini skirt and I'd be jumping around going, chemistry. It's like insane. Everything was so hyper back then. When I listened to the songs and I was like, oh my God, did we really play this fast? It was so hyper.
I mean, you listen to a lot of stuff from back then. It was pretty hyper. That was the age of, in a certain sense, the age of hyper music, and you don't hear that kind of stuff being made that way anymore.
And it was not drug induced, by the way, at least over here. I don't know about anybody else.
Right. Yeah, there's not a lot of heart in a lot of the music you hear anymore. A lot of things are very, in my opinion, over popularized, like over popped, where like it's just too pop, too corporate, too modern. There's not really a lot of heart in a lot of things anymore. And that's just from my preference, so I agree with you there. I want to touch upon then this little thing you guys sent me. This little this little
you
thing
mean chemistry set?
I mean,
it's an interesting
chemistry
read.
set. It is an interesting read.
Even interesting more hearing it.
There you go. And if you do get the CD, or any form of physical media for this, they do a great job of providing a lot of information about the band's backstory. They have all the lyrics, what year they were copyrighted on this little pamphlet. So, super beneficial.
A lot of modern artists won't do CDs anymore because it's a digital world we live in and everything is digital download, and CDs are expensive to make, even the most modest packaging. As a reviewer, I get tons of stuff that I can't believe people spent the kind of money that they're spending on the packaging. It's art in and of itself.
This is like the third time this has happened. You guys are actually leading right into the question I was going to ask. This album, Experiments from the Lab, which, it is a lot of your recordings from 81 to 87 in the studio, especially for a band that's not on a major label or anything. What was the process of remastering these tracks and getting this onto a CD like?
Oh boy. that's Terry's... Terry's
take this, or do you want to start it, Stephen, and then I'll...
Well, yeah, I mean, the tapes came from several different studios. I mean, we're lucky to actually have as many of the original master tapes as we had. But in the process of doing this, we didn't realize until I talked to my buddy from Chain DLK, Mark Urselli, you have to have these things baked, a lot of stuff done with it, prepped before you can even take that music and put it in a modern digital setting. And fortunately, Terry lived close enough to probably the preeminent tape restore, Grammy-winning studio engineer Michael Graves, who made this stuff really come alive.
When I was going through the closet, I found the tapes that were all sealed up. Besides the 24 tracks, we did have some half tracks, some quarter tracks, some things that were done on an 8-track machine, some things that were done. There was a studio we worked with a 12-track. There was the 8 tracks. There was a different 8-track place, and then there was the 24 tracks plus the 4 tracks on the TAC that I had. So I had it. The biggest job was to get Iron Curtain 82 and I Am Vapor 1981 transferred off of those 4 tracks.
Because they were never recorded they were only recorded on the 4-track demo. They were never recorded in regular, pay-as-you-go studios.
So that was a real job because my 4-track machine can only transfer 2 tracks at a time. So I went 2 tracks at a time into Pro Tools, and literally the tapes were squeaking and it hadn't been played in like 40 years. So holding down the tape with one hand and using the Pro Tools, knobs, menus on the other hand, and trying to get over 2 tracks at a time, which I eventually did, took a few times. And then what was interesting, the next process with those 4 tracks was Michael Graves is not a mixer, or he doesn't have Pro Tools, although he had an assistant that also has Pro Tools, and he did virtual mixing with me, which I've never done virtual mixing. So that was also another fabulous learning experiences over the last year.
I give Terry an awful lot of credit for having these tapes turned into something really listenable, because it was a technical nightmare. I mean, I'd hear from, we had to do this and this session and that session and this session. Like, holy mackerel.
Yeah, well, Steve, you were not involved in most of this, but it was literally like, I was so afraid that those little tiny cassette tapes, you know how thin those tapes are, that not only every time you do a pass on those, just not to get too technical in this interview, but every time you play them, they stretch out and they don't match. So the next two tracks didn't match. So I had to go into Pro Tools, and anybody who's ever used Pro Tools or Logic Pro or anything, you have to fastidiously go through and cut and match it up and like squeak it so that you make sure that it kind of works. And then with Jordan McLeod over at Osiris, he, pulled up I have Pro Tools 9. So he pulled up Pro Tools 23. We couldn't even get the Pro Tools 9 into Pro Tools 23. That was a whole nother process. He was able to bring up a whole bunch of other EQs because all of the different effects that are inherently in Pro Tools and all the different plugins are even more advanced now, obviously. Some of these parts, like for example, I guess it's a bugaboo for Steve on Vapor, the solo.
I was thinking about that.
Yeah, the solo
we lost
was just
the original solo.
Yeah, the solo was just so distorted and so full of noise that even with all the noise gates and everything else he tried, it was just, ugh. So I went, we would do these virtual sessions, and then I'd go back into Pro Tools, do some more editing. And that's what happened with Iron Curtain too. I had finished it in 2014 for the new one, but I had tried to hire different interns from college audio programs. And it's interesting what you said, Nikki, about how people in your age group are musicians or interested in music. And I would have assumed that the people at the audio mixing and other support were in it because they have their own music that they want to mix. Well, it turns out most of these people, I would say 99.9%, are not musicians. So I guess they think they're going to get some big job mixing for some live band or something somewhere. They didn't know music. So bottom line, I put it up on the shelf for like, what was it now? We're talking 9 years. And then pulled it back down again. And during this virtual mixing process, thought, oh, well, maybe I can explore some of that now in Pro Tools, and then come back and work with Jordan and say, look, I want this to be panned. I try to pan it this way. And he goes, oh, well, I have another program that'll make it sound even more panned, So he added a lot of sweetening. And then it went to Michael Graves, who did the mastering and made even the 4 tracks that, were obviously
really good.
They obviously, don't sound like the 24 tracks. What he did especially, and I think was a fantastic favor for Steve. So even though you weren't there, Steve, you were there in spirit because he wanted all the bass parts to be pumping. And they were like blasting out of the speakers at like 11. And, along with the drums, which unfortunately, again, not to get too technical, but on the 4 tracks, we always taped the drums and then separate track for the bass. But then we had to bounce them together so that we have additional tracks available to do the keyboards and then the vocals and then any vocal harmonies. So by the time we got to the upper tracks, you have your bass and drums on one track. So they're sandwiched in together, and there's only so much you can do. So last year I remember asking Michael, and this might be something of a tidbit for anybody who's interested in future music. I said, is there any way we can separate these tracks? Because it's driving me crazy. I'm trying to EQ the drums to be present, but not so trebly so that they're overpowering everything else while not sacrificing the bottom of the bass. At the time, Michael Graves said, no, we don't, there's no such program. Really, I wish there was, but I hear they are working on it. Now, I don't know who they is, but I'm going to touch base with them again and find out, have they made any progress? Because that is really a key for the future. If we're ever to resurrect any other songs, is to, once I go through that process again of extracting anything off of a 4-track, is to find out if we can separate those tracks that have been solidified together on that tiny little thin piece of plastic.
Did not realize that's the process that.
Sorry to go on so long.
No, you're fine. I didn't realize that's how much went into just this thing right here. Granted, it sounds like you guys did a good job because the audio is, good. It doesn't sound muffled or distorted. Like, it sounds like an actual good remaster on here.
When we were back in the studio, we spent a hell of a lot of time trying to get the best sound we could in any given studio that we're in. On the so all the time we spent on the bass drum for
the snare. I can't tell you how many hours we paid for snare sound. if I
Oh my
could hear
God.
another for another few hours. And then it was like, okay, we have 10 minutes to record the vocals. Okay, great. You know,
Right.
so just to follow up on that really quick for the listeners, because there's a lot of people, and by the way, we have one more subscriber since I last looked. We're up to 66. Woohoo! A few people have asked, and this is why I mentioned it in the interview, you know, do you have any more material? You know, that we're just hungry for more material. It's like the process that I just described, and the reason I described it is because it's not like just push a button. You know, in the studio, when they say, oh, how does this sound? And they push a button and they're not really doing anything. It's just like, oh yeah, that sounds so much better. Well, it's not just push a button. It's literally like digging. And what's so interesting about going up to Osiris, not to give him a plug so much, but the mentality that Michael Graves had about resurrecting really old stuff. Most of the things that he works on are from like the 30s, like Robert Johnson folk on a guitar, you know, I mean, and restoring things. Literally, he showed me something that he unearthed, that somebody unearthed in Egypt, and they sent it to him, and it was covered with dirt. And so he said he got this box, and it was this tape that, no, literally it was because there was such unrest in the country that the people who were fleeing the village, they buried the tape. Okay. And then they left the village, and then the village was decimated. Somebody went back, and the family went back later and dug it up, and like, there's my tape. That's the thing that I kept. Right. So you think I'm crazy about being a hoarder on the tapes, but these people actually in Egypt went through this process of literally being removed from their homes and in danger of being, you know, shot to death. And the thing that they're thinking of is, I'm burying my music because someday somebody will find it. It got into Michael Graves' hands, and he restored it, lovingly restored it.
Last question here before I cut you guys loose and you guys make the next Breaking Bad series with your chemistry. I wanted to ask.
No.
Don't go down that road.
You guys have been through a lot together. You know, you started off auditioning for a prog rock band. You guys had a number of people in the chemistry set band. Years later, you find out that you have a present online from a younger generation because your song was a mystery. With this newly found internet fame you guys have, what can we expect coming from chemistry set in the future?
First of all, I wouldn't exactly call it internet fame yet.
We would love to get to that point. Thank you, Nikki. First of all, I would like to say thank you to Nikki for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely.
The whole idea that anyone would have ever heard of us at all in the past, let alone 40 years later, is just completely astonishing to me every day. Being new to YouTube, Premiere Pro, most of social media since last August, when I first was tasked with getting a video to go along with the release of the song Chemistry, I would just say that it's been a learning experience, but to have any subscribers and any following is fantastic. I mean, back in the day, we used to have a sign in, you know, want to be on our list for direct mail.
Mailing list.
Remember direct mail?
Well, everybody did
66 subscribers. Yeah. And we were very appreciative of every single one of them.
The thing that we didn't realize was that there was going to be a market for 80s new wave synth pop music. We figured, yeah, that stuff is fallen by the wayside. Nobody cares about that anymore, yada, yada, yada. Well, it turns out there are a lot of people who really love it. And some of the people who love it are sort of in our age bracket. They're big on the nostalgia trip. So if you're nostalgic for 80s, undiscovered 80s music or barely discovered 80s music, you really, really need to check out Chemistry Set, because we're almost like the missing link of American synth pop from that period of time.
Boom. Mic drop. That's it.
We're old dogs, but we can learn new tricks. So, you know, we've learned to be able to use social media to some extent. We obviously don't have the kind of reach. We don't do TikTok. We don't do a lot of other stuff. But YouTube has just been really fantastic to work with, because a lot of people, even in the like Gen X and then the Gen Xers kids, and I found out my kids at school, the moms have a moms group and they like this kind of music. So it's like, well, get your moms to listen to it. You know, it's like, never thought it would be like that. But I mean, curating pieces of art like this, if you can see it on the inside, maybe if Nikki holds it up on the inside cover, there's 3 kids sitting in a chemistry class. I just was curating, looking like a former librarian, looking for art that was about a chemistry class. And next thing you know, that art pops up. And again, it's like serendipity, just like how people were on YouTube and WhatsApp and found Iron Curtain snippets, it was like, oh, this is definitely the song chemistry. So that's why I based the first video is a cartoon. It's a little cute. It's a little quirky. It's a lot like the early chemistry set. So it pretty much characterizes where we were at in 1981-82. The latest thing we're going to release is a announcing. There's a premiere for the latest video on March 23rd for Wake Up and Live, which I think you mentioned you liked that song.
I do. As someone who grew up playing Mario, it sounds like something from a Mario game, and I mean that in the best way possible.
Okay.
Like, all I can picture is just like playing, like, I don't know, Mario Kart, being by one of the beach levels and just hearing.
So that's that high pitched,
yeah, like
constant.
I don't know if it's the same kind of instrumentation or same kind of rhythm, but it just sounds like something from a Mario game. That's why it connected with me so quickly.
That's why I asked you about that, because it's so interesting to find out that people in your age bracket who were raised on video games I guess it's kind of a throwback for you to be like, oh, that's like the childhood games that I played are actually stemming from a lot of these synth sounds of the 80s.
Right, exactly. They were replicating or in some way, in a lot of ways influenced by the sound of the 80s, the late 70s, post-punk, new wave, things like that.
An interesting thing about that song is that originally it had this extended break in it that has all sorts of sound effects, babies crying, alarm clocks going off, and all sorts of weird stuff. Well, we ended up taking that out because it kind of spoiled the flow in a sense.
It was distracting from the song. Yeah. The song in itself, I mean, maybe it has a few too many wake up and lives, to be critical. But by 1986, when we did this song on an 8-track, by that point, it had been hammered into us enough by managers and agents who were from
you need to have a hook or whatever. You need to have a hook.
You two know how to write song. Write me another hit song. Well,
yeah, like the white collared higher ups just demanding something as they have a cigar in their mouth. That's how I picture it.
Actually, we used to go to New York City and go to Tin Pan Alley back in the day, before you were even a kernel of an idea of being born, Nikki.
See, like, again, like all those things just right over my head. I wasn't even a thought yet.
It would be so fun for you guys to go, you youngins, to get transported back into
that time.
It was so different. I mean,
even watching movies set in that period doesn't really give you the full and total perspective of what it was like. It was something absolutely completely different. But the great thing about Wake Up and Live is it's a very positive and upbeat song. Yeah. It's a song about basically taking your blinders off and enjoying life. Wake up and live.
Right.
Pretty self-explanatory. And what I try to do in the video is put it from the perspective, because I have a daughter who's in high school, and I've had a son who's special needs, and he's 21 now, and they've both gone through a lot of the mental challenges that teens have gone through, especially during COVID and whatnot, all the peer pressure with social media, and a lot of very negative aspects of social media that's very insidious and that can get into body image and just that whole scenario. So I try to get into it from the perspective of a female in this video about how, you can, one of the lines is, take a look in the looking glass, or see yourself in the looking glass. Can't remember my own lyrics now. And tell me what you see. What you see is the goodness within yourself. You don't have to be influenced by all these trolls out there who are trying to tell you you're not good enough. Right. So the message I'm trying to get, again, it's a positive song and it's a poppy song, but we're always, as writers and songwriters, which is really our craft, we're songwriters. We're not like celebrities or, anything like that. We're not just doing it because, we have big hair that we want to pump up. We're trying to get a message across to relay to people from our experiences that, we understand, and we get it. We've been through it. Maybe this will help you, if you listen to this when you're sad, it might make you feel better.
Right.
And that would be like the ultimate compliment to me, is someone listens to the songs and says, you guys just uplifted my day, or you made my day.
That's the point.
Yeah,
that's absolutely
exactly
the point.
Well, I can tell you one thing. When the song was solved, it made a lot of people's days, and I imagine somewhere out there are probably people who maybe have messaged you or maybe who haven't yet that I know for a fact you probably made their day because, not to toot your guys' horns, but I'm going to anyway. When Chemistry Set was solved, you know, because Lost Wave is becoming so big, we like to do like, or the community likes to do these things where we look back at like some of the biggest solves of like maybe the year 2023, the biggest solves for this month. Chemistry Set was one of the biggest solves of 2023 of the year because
Incredible.
it was so short because, you know, it was only mysterious for a couple of months. There are some songs that go decades before being solved. I mean, I remember the first time I heard Iron Curtain, again, it sounded like something from a video game, like, you know, like you're running through the 80s. Like, that's all I can picture. It's just like I'm running in like some sort of like, you know, 80s Tron-like simulation here in the start of that song. But
Tron, yeah.
you guys definitely made an impact in the Lost Wave community. And
wow, that's really amazing to hear that.
you guys got known by being, you know, unknown. So
yeah,
kind of a cool thing, you know, not many musicians have. So
that's very cool. And thank you so much for finding us.
Yeah, no, likewise. And thank you guys for taking the time to do this interview here with me today. I want to appreciate you for both of your time, your information, your knowledge, your patience. It's been a great conversation with you guys.
Thanks.
And as someone who is a fan of the Lost Wave community and Chemistry Set, I look forward to seeing your next steps.
Thank you so much. March 23rd premiere video. April 20th, the single comes out for Wake Up and Live. And there'll be more coming along. We'll keep in touch.
Make sure to get your CDs, everyone. Make sure to get your albums. I'll leave a link to every one of their links in my description.
That's great.